hope and pray that this will lead to something positive for me and for the people involved, and even for you, dear viewer. My prayer is that good things come to all of us. So here's hoping. So I'm conflicted about starting the video like this, but it relates, and we have to start somewhere, right? This was supposed to be a straightforward video, a continuation of a series of videos I'm making with Canon camera equipment that I got to borrow. The plan for this one was to go to New Orleans, meet up with a filmmaker friend, and do some camera tests in his studio. Specifically, I wanted to see how footage from the 1D X Mark II, one of the preeminent DSLRs in the Canon lineup, would compare with footage from the C500, the first Canon cinema camera that could output 4K footage. Although we didn't end up outputting 4K on that camera, I'll get to that in a bit. But anyway, I would then try to make a promo video out of the footage we shot, tell you how the video came together, and hopefully it could have been some kind of useful video resource. But then Hurricane Ida came along and changed the plan. Well, it is common knowledge that the best laid plans of mice and men, ostriches, camels, and kangaroos often go awry. The best laid plans of gerbils, on the other hand, are almost always perfectly executed. Sneaky gerbil. A lot could be said about sneaky gerbils, but I should get back to the conversation at hand, or I'll find a way to delay it indefinitely. Yeah, it's one of those conversations. You know, one of these days I might actually do a straightforward video, would sure make things a whole lot easier, but as I suggested in the first video in this series, the next few videos and the events that surround them, the responses I get, will influence what comes next. Since that's the case, I figured it would be more honest to acknowledge the storm instead of pretending that it didn't happen. So, this video is for those of you who have ever faced something unexpected that tried to derail your passion project or pursuit of a dream. How are ya?
Hi everyone.
This is Kirby Voss. He's a New Orleans-based filmmaker, a certified Da Vinci Resolve instructor, and the executive director of COOL Cooperative.
This is our nonprofit. We teach students in middle and high school how to make movies. So let me show you around and we're going to get started on some camera tests.
This is the studio space for COOL Cooperative, a 501c3 organization. Cool space you guys have here.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks. This is our studio. It's a bit of a mess. We've just got a ton of new gear, but we have all the C-stands, combo stands, flags, gels, lights that you could possibly want. So we're pretty happy with it.
And this is Armani, one of the COOL Cooperative students.
Setting up the tripod, about to get this shot done.
You're like, I'm trying to work here, excuse me, and you guys are putting the camera in my face? No, it's all good. That's how we do it. All right. Kirby brought him in to help us with the shoot. While we were getting lights set up, Kirby demonstrated his skill as a teacher by casually gauging Armani's level of knowledge and then offering a few helpful tidbits. One such tidbit is that they call this light a pepper light because it's there to sprinkle just a little bit of light, kind of like a pepper shaker sprinkling just a little bit of pepper on some food. Okay, great. Thanks for the tip there, Kirby. For the shoot, I brought along my turntable and a bottle of
3-roll estate rum from New Orleans.
Actually, it's made in beautiful Baton Rouge. Not in this actual location, it's just a cool mural, you know. Anyway, I wanted to bring a little bit of Baton Rouge, the city where I'm staying, to the New Orleans shoot. 3-roll estate is one of the few places in the world that has a sugarcane farm, a mill, and a distillery in close proximity. They call it cane to glass, and it allows them to make rum agricole, their signature rum that uses fresh pressed cane juice without sweeteners or additives. A lot of times when you have the distance, you're not able to use that fresh pressed cane juice. So it's quite good. It's probably my favorite of the rums they make, but it's a clear rum. So I thought for the shoot, it would be more interesting to shoot something that had a little more color. So I brought along their spice rum.
We've got a very basic lighting setup. We've got a 2K tungsten bouncing off our tin ceiling to give a little bit of fill here. And then we've got a little pepper in the back with that backlight. It's gonna give us some beautiful halation here. Two different cameras, two different lenses. On our 1D Mark II, we do have the Canon L series lens. It's the 24 to 70 2.8, I believe. And wide open ISO 800. And it's giving us really great interplay with the flaring in the back from that pepper, and it looks really good. On the C500, we actually have the Helios 44, which is a pretty famous Soviet lens. It's well known for its circular bokeh, and it's giving us some beautiful vertical halation actually. A little bit of a different color, so I'm excited to play around with that in post and see how much flexibility we have.
This video isn't primarily about testing cameras, but it was going to be. So let me take a moment to tell you more about the shoot and some takeaways about the equipment. We were using the EOS-1D X Mark II and the C500 because those were the cameras that Canon let me borrow. But as you heard, we were using different lenses on the cameras. To do a true side-by-side comparison, you'd want to use the same lenses. But then Canon sent me the C500 with the PL mount, and the 1DX has the EF mount. As you may know, the PL lenses are often used in feature film production, while the EF mount is the native one for Canon's DSLRs, and it allows the camera to take advantage of its autofocus capabilities with the lenses. There are PL to EF adapters out there, but then we couldn't test the autofocus on the 1DX Mark II. And besides, I was more interested in trying to get compelling footage in a studio environment than in doing a more controlled test. Another reason why it wasn't a true side-by-side comparison is because we ended up shooting 4K on the 1DX Mark II and HD on the C500. The C500 can also shoot 4K, but only when outputting to a compatible external recorder. You want to use these BNC connectors, and it's screwed on there fairly tightly. You gotta do this here. Always makes for compelling television. Unscrewing, unscrewing, unscrewing. All right, so there you are. Kirby had a recorder with an SDI input, but it wouldn't work with the camera because it has to support dual 3G SDI, or 3 gigabytes per second, which is a lot even today. I couldn't find a comprehensive list of which external recorders support 4K capture on the C500. Even the Canon USA knowledge base is limited in that area. But I figured it might have been possible to output at least 2K from the camera to Kirby's recorder, since 2K would be using less data. Even that didn't work, though. The early Canon cinema cameras have limited output options, essentially offering an all or nothing data feed. Fortunately, the next generation of Canon cinema cameras offer more flexibility in that area. So we were really comparing apples and oranges with our camera shoot, but even though we were shooting HD on the C500 and 4K on the 1DX Mark II, I still like the footage from the C500 quite a bit. It had more warmth to it by default, and even at HD resolution, it didn't seem less sharp than the 4K footage from the 1DX Mark II. That makes sense because the C500 has a 4K sensor and uses that pixel data to produce a crisp, oversampled HD signal. I really like the warm feel of that shot, but I'm not sure what settings we used to get it. That's partly because the rain was coming down hard for part of the shoot, and we eventually ran into power issues. So we were pressed for time and trying to move quickly from one setup to the next. We supplemented the rudimentary notes I was taking with audio descriptions, but unlike most Canon cameras, the C500 doesn't have a built-in microphone, and I forgot about that. On a feature film where sound is recorded separately, that's not such a big deal, but a built-in mic does come in handy, even if it is used as a scratch track for sync purposes or shooting notes. We shot additional clips on the C500 beyond the exposures we noted for the shoot, so without reference audio or a camera slate, which we weren't using for the sake of speed, I can't be sure exactly of what settings we were using, at least on the C500. With the 1D X Mark II, the recorded clips have metadata that automatically include shooting information about camera settings, and you can see those during playback on camera. But with the C500, you have to manually enter in that information to view it after the fact, at least as far as I know. I haven't found a way to extract shooting settings that weren't manually entered on the C500, but if you know of a way to do that, I would be glad to hear about it, and I'm sure others would as well. So leave a comment and let us know. The C500 Mark II, which replaced the C500 and came out towards the end of 2019, does have a built-in mic, a user-swappable lens mount to easily transition between EF and PL lenses, the ability to record 4K internally, even 4K RAW, and some other helpful improvements over the original. It was enough of a step forward that Gerald Undone here on YouTube called it
the best camera I've ever used.
I'll include a link to his C500 Mark II review in the show notes. If you have the budget for it, the C500 Mark II is definitely a worthwhile cinema camera to consider, but it looks like it's still going for around $15,999, and that doesn't include the high-speed CF Express cards you'll need to record 4K RAW footage internally or whatever other accessories you might want to bring to the shoot. In contrast, these days you can find used versions of the original C500 or the EOS-1D X Mark II for around $3,000 or less. And so you could find them at even more affordable rates if you were to just rent them for a few days. Now, let's say you want to shoot 4K with the C500, then you could pair that with something like the Convergent Design Odyssey 7Q Plus recorder, one of the more popular options for pairing with the C500. And these days you could probably find a recorder like that for around $1,000 or less, especially if you get it used. With the 1D X Mark II, if you want to shoot 4K at 60 frames per second, as opposed to just 24 or 30 frames a second, you'll want to pick up a couple of CFast 2 cards, which can run a few $100s, but they're a little cheaper than the CF Express cards that the C500 Mark II uses. Now, if you're bringing in enough revenue from your projects, then there's nothing wrong with using the latest cameras available. But it's disheartening when I hear about filmmakers who take on massive debt to make their films without a viable way to make that money back. Getting into Sundance and getting the sweetheart deal is the long shot. It's not a business plan, all right? Filmmaking is already hard enough without escalating price pressures in almost every department. So anything you can do to keep costs manageable is worth considering. I'm not suggesting to use subpar equipment, but the EOS-1D X Mark II and the C500 were once flagship cameras in their respective lineups and are still capable of capturing exceptional footage. The C500 was one of the cameras used to film projects as diverse as Avengers: Age of Ultron, The Big Short, and Get On Up. And the EOS-1D X Mark II has been used to shoot marquee events like the Super Bowl, the Olympics, and all kinds of commercials and music videos. With the footage we shot from both cameras during our COOL Cooperative shoot, I was able to push the exposure by 2 to 3 stops in Adobe Premiere and still get pleasing results, even when we underexpose or overexpose the footage. So I wouldn't hesitate to use either camera on another project. Between the two, I personally would probably opt for the 1D X Mark II because of the camera's professional-grade autofocus capabilities, the high-quality 4K footage it captures, and a form factor that allows for run-and-gun handheld shooting. The C500 might make more sense for those of you who want more audio inputs into the camera, want to record 4K RAW to a compatible external recorder, and tend to shoot with PL lenses. As I mentioned in the prior video in this series, I work for Canon, so I'm a little partial here, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the company. These are just my personal observations about the equipment they let me borrow. And besides, over the years, I've bought thousands of dollars worth of Canon equipment, and I wouldn't do that if I didn't believe in its quality. I like the warm Canon look and the extensive lens options available for the cameras, some of which are amongst the most popular and well-regarded lenses in the world. But there are all kinds of viable camera options to consider, so whether you decide to shoot with Canon equipment or not, it might make sense to consider what is possible with cameras and lenses that are accessible to you and your production, even if they aren't the latest versions available. So, those are the related technical observations I wanted to share. After the shoot, I drove back to Baton Rouge, grateful that I got to work with Kirby. While driving back, I was trying to figure out what I could do with the footage we shot. A few days later, I stumbled on a video featuring some of the 3-roll estate team showing how to make a zombie. The drink, not the other kind, you know. But the drink involves pineapple juice and papaya. And so I thought, rum already has that Caribbean influence. So I thought it might be interesting to find some footage of pineapples and papayas and play with that, add that to the footage and try to make a video from those elements. Just as I was getting my ideas together, I heard about Hurricane Ida. And some people were suggesting that Baton Rouge was right in the strike zone, where the storm's impact was supposed to be the strongest. Now, I'm not someone who's ready to evacuate every time a storm comes near. If I did that, I would probably be evacuating every couple of months, because, it's just a part of being in Louisiana. But a few storm watchers were suggesting that Ida might be on par with or stronger than Katrina when it made landfall all those years ago. I wasn't in Louisiana when Katrina hit, but I've been here since 2011, and while I've been here, I've met people who have lost homes and businesses because of Katrina. So comparisons to Katrina get my attention. It seemed likely that Baton Rouge would at least lose power for a few days, so I figured I would head to Houston and try to get some work done over there until the storm subsided and power was restored. Houston was in the opposite direction of the storm's path, and I'd once shot a music video out there. I like the area enough to be willing to revisit it under less than ideal circumstances. So I thought, all right, let's go to Houston. Hurricane Ida wasn't expected to hit Baton Rouge until late Sunday night or early Monday morning in late August. So I figured leaving on Saturday would give me plenty of time to get to Houston before the storm. Now, the unsettling part of this story is that it wasn't just a rational calculation to leave on Saturday. It felt like I should go that day, not Sunday. Why did I have to leave that day? I don't know, but it may have made all the difference. When Saturday came, I helped my roommate get the generator ready and secure some items on the property so that they would be less likely to fly around and cause damage during the storm. Then I finished packing, which actually took longer than expected. But then back in 2016, I'd helped someone clean out an entire house worth of stuff damaged during the Great Flood of Baton Rouge. So I figured since I was evacuating, I might as well bring along my camera equipment and other items I didn't want to lose, just in case. There's something else that's worth mentioning at this point as well. I hadn't had a drink for a week on that Saturday, and as I was starting the trip to Houston, I thought about stopping at the grocery store to get some snacks for the road and maybe even some alcohol for when I got to Houston, just in case the storm caused places to shut down out there as well. I actually had a sense that I should do that, but I dismissed it. I'd gone without alcohol for a week, so I figured I could go without it for a few more days. And besides, I was already behind schedule. It was afternoon and supposed to be a 4.5-hour drive to Houston. I figured there might be a couple of hours of traffic on top of that, so I wanted to get on the road as soon as I could. Well, I figured wrong. There wasn't a couple hours of traffic. There was quite a bit more. Actually, it's the only trip I remember being on where the time remaining for the trip, as listed on Google Maps, kept increasing every hour. Well, Google just told me to expect a 6-hour delay, and then it says remaining time 4 hours 47 minutes. One of these things is not quite right. On top of that, part of the route that Google had set for me was blocked off by state troopers. So it was probably going to take even longer than Google was estimating. Frustrating to say the least. The only small note of encouragement I encountered were several bucket trucks driving into Baton Rouge. At least they were mobilizing to get power back up even before it went down. As the traffic delays continued, afternoon turned to evening. We were barely moving for much of the trip, so I figured I might as well stop at the next available convenience store right off the road, use the bathroom, get something to eat, because I might not get another viable option for a while. The place I stopped at was Billy's Homemade Boudin and Cracklins, and I gotta hand it to them, the place had personality. Now, those of you who aren't from Louisiana might not have the foggiest notion of what Boudin and Cracklins are. I didn't before I came to Louisiana, so here's a quick Louisiana culinary lesson for you. Boudin is pork and rice mixture, sometimes also made with seasoning, various vegetables, and then stuffed in a thin pork casing. Cracklings are pork rinds or pig skins, usually fried with some extra fat added. Good stuff, both of those. So I thought about getting some of that or whatever other fried or barbecue concoctions were offered at Billy's Homemade Boudin and Cracklins. I mean, how often do I get to visit a place like that, right? I even had a sense that I should. But the line for hot food was quite long. So Instead, I just got some homemade pecan toffee. They had a shorter line for cold food snacks, and went back to the car. That was $12 toffee, so let's see what that tastes like. But you know, might as well get something, 'cause it's another hours and hours. You know, it's interesting. Sometimes the photos and videos we casually capture can tell a story, even when we're not planning for that to happen. But sometimes the story is in the gaps, in between the photos, clips, and updates we capture or share. I took this while parked at Billy's homemade boudin in Cracklands. The next photos I took were several hours later. Not some of my best work, but then that's my car, carrying the things in my life that I cared about protecting, and forced to expose its battered innards for all the world to see. I was too numb to think about getting a great shot. I was just thinking I should snap a few photos before they towed the car, just in case my insurance company asked for them. Not that they did. Coverage I had was liability for the other driver, not me or the Silver Phoenix. It's the name I gave my Jeep a few years back when I first got it. But this Phoenix would not rise from the ashes. He met his demise that dreary night. The accident happened in Jennings, Louisiana, still a few hours from Houston, where I had reserved a room. All the hotels in Jennings were booked up because of Hurricane Ida. So I asked the first responders, police, if they could just move the car to the side of the road and let me sleep there for the night. They said no. The emergency service worker swept up fragments of my car off the road, like he was just doing a job, not sweeping away all the hopes and dreams that my Jeep had come to represent during the 2 years we shared together. The worker was just doing his job, and I don't begrudge him for that, but that didn't make me feel any better. This is the second Jeep I lost in 2 years. Both were pre-owned cars, used cars, but still enough to destabilize my world. Best laid plans, right? I asked the tow truck driver if he knew of anywhere I could go. And so he took me to a travel center nearby, basically a glorified gas station. Did they have beds in the back or a place where I could lie down, I asked. With a little chuckle, the driver told me that no, they didn't, but they did have a restaurant that might still be open. Great. As the tow truck driver dropped me off at that travel center, I figured I would never see my car again or the things it carried. So I needed to take whatever I could and try to find a place to stay. The travel center didn't seem like it was in the best part of town, but at least they had a restaurant that might still be open, right? Way down with several bags that held my computer and camera equipment, my forward progress was reduced to a slow trot. Even from a distance, astute observers would probably deduce I was carrying valuable equipment. And I was wearing open-toed sandals of all things. Okay, just side note, don't wear open-toed sandals when doing an evacuation. I know I should have known better. I just thought I wanted to wear something comfortable. But, you know, they're not exactly designed for speed sprints. So I was an easy target. I'm not normally someone who gets too worried, even when I'm in a secluded area alone at night. But that night, I figured it was just a matter of hours before I was robbed. Before I tell you what happened next, I should tell you how I got there. To shave a few minutes off of my travel time, Google Maps had sent me through a detour of dark and winding country roads. I came to an intersection, one that didn't have a full-on stoplight, just one of those hanging, blinking yellow lights and a stop sign. I stopped, then drove through the intersection. Suddenly, I saw another car coming on fast, much faster than the speed limit, it seemed to me. I tried to brake, tried to swerve out of the way, but I didn't have enough time for that. So we collided. Kaboom. The police officer who got there after the fact said that it was my fault. Regardless of how fast the other driver was going, I didn't stop and yield, he said. Well, I've had plenty of time to replay the accident in my mind, and I don't think it was my fault. But then the officer got there after the fact and had no way of knowing how fast the other car was going. Much easier to point to the stop sign on my side. So that's how I got there. But the question that weighed on me more was whether it could have gone otherwise. All kinds of what-if questions flooded my mind. What if I had waited to leave on Sunday? What if I had stopped at the grocery store to get snacks or drinks before starting the trip? What if I had waited in that long line to get hot food at Billy's homemade boudin and cracklings? If I could have answered yes to any of those questions, my Jeep would probably still be intact. And then there was my prayer that I spoke aloud while driving just a few minutes before the accident. I was praying for gratitude, to better appreciate the good things in my life and for help to turn around the broken parts. This is me reflecting on that shortly after the accident. I prayed while on the trip right before the accident. I was trying to list the things that I'm grateful for. And then I asked for help. Yeah, that's it. Maybe it's just because I've seen the movie more times than I can count, but I couldn't help but recall that line from It's a Wonderful Life.
That's what I get for praying. The last time you come in here, you hear that, Nick?
That's what I get for praying. Yeah. Trying to avoid a disaster, I ended up colliding right into it, not long after praying for better things. It felt like my own personal appointment in Samara. I told you I didn't have a drink for a week before the accident, but I've had a drink almost every day since. The end. Stupid story, the end. Thank you, Jesus. I was tired and numb when I recorded that lament, and some of my skin was bruised enough that it hurt if I moved too much, so I wasn't thinking clearly. But I was right about something. The accident could be a kind of end, an incident that led to a downward spiral. Not because of what happened, but because of my reactions to it. I tried not to let it get to me, but the accident seemed to encapsulate so much about my time in Louisiana. And it wasn't just the accident, but a cumulative effect of the aches that came before, that still sting. After the accident, I did try to put up a good fight and keep pressing forward, but some days anger, even despair prevailed. I'm not proud of those days. As I spent more time reflecting on what happened, I remembered that the last tweet I had posted before the storm was about David Lowery's film adaptation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There's a point in the film where Gawain sees one possible future for his life, and he has to make a choice about whether that is a life he wants. It felt kind of like that. I was starting to get some sense of how things might go if I let the accident, the hurts that came before, get the best of me. And I didn't really like that ending. Even when I recorded that line about the ending, another story was unfolding, one I couldn't fully acknowledge at the time, not when I was still aching from the accident. But it was there nonetheless, waiting in the back of my mind for the chance to be heard. To explain that, I need to tell you about what happened that night after the accident. I was too disoriented that night to have a clear sense of chronology, but around the time the tow truck driver dropped me off at that illustrious travel center, or a few minutes before, I called some other hotels nearby, just in case they knew of anywhere that still had vacancies. They didn't. Then I remembered there was one person I knew in Jennings, my friend Heather. Had I not gone on a road trip during the summer of 2021, just a few months ago, I probably wouldn't have remembered that she lived there. I had visited her there once before, but that was a while back when Jennings was just a name for me to type into Google Maps. I've typed in a number of names like that, and they don't always make an impression. But when I had mentioned my summer road trip to Heather, she had suggested that I come visit Jennings. She offered to give me a tour of the town, so Jennings ended up being my first stop on that trip. And that's when the town first made a memorable impression on me. A few minutes earlier in this video, I suggested that these impromptu Canon camera related videos would determine if I press onward with some bigger projects. Well, telling the story of that summer road trip is one of those projects. The challenging part is not that the road trip covered a lot of territory, which it did. The challenge is finding a coherent, engaging way to tell the story about why I went on that road trip and what happened when I did. I'm not sure I can tell that story. Not at this point, not after certain recent developments. And the accident hasn't helped. For one thing, I spent a lot of time on that trip in the Silver Phoenix, traveling from place to place in search of better things. Sifting through the hours of footage I captured would be a constant reminder of its tragic demise, the demise of the Silver Phoenix. Going through just a couple of minutes of my Jeep for this video was hard enough. That might change. I don't know. But at the moment, telling that road trip story is more than I can bear given the circumstances. It would take something at least on par with the accident, but positive, to get me to revisit that possibility at this point. Anyway, I called Heather after remembering that she lived in town. She wasn't available, so I left a message trying not to sound too incoherent or distraught. In the middle of the night, no less. A few minutes later, she called me back. She had evacuated, but her mom was still in town, and she said her mom could come and pick me up, drop me off at Heather's house, her house. I recorded that message about the end shortly after I got to Heather's place. Part of it was to remind myself of how I felt, so as not to get too caught up in whatever fleeting hopes might surface afterwards. But another part of me realized that I had to acknowledge the dissonance and at least try to move past it, if not turn it into something positive. Otherwise, it could turn into a death blow in more ways than one. Had Heather not let me stay at her place, I really don't know where I would have ended up that night. Probably not in a good place. Almost certain I wouldn't be making this video. So, in that sense, those disjointed hours after the accident at Heather's weren't really an ending. At least they don't have to be. They were also the seeds to an unexpected, nascent possibility. A new beginning for the video about my shoot with Kirby, and maybe for other things as well. And besides, Kirby had done such a beautiful job of lighting that bottle, and I wanted something positive to come out of our collaboration. So I determined to get back to work on making a 3-roll estate video promo from the footage. A few things helped me to keep pressing onward. When it reopened on Monday, Heather's dad took me to the wrecking service lot where my car was towed. If the car had been kept in an unsecured area, or if someone associated with the towing company had been dishonest, it would have been easy for some of my things to walk away without the company accepting liability.
What do you want? We can't watch this thing all night. What do you think we're doing here? We're not babysitters here. Come on.
To my surprise, though, all of my things were still there. The company had secured my car and didn't try to exploit my unfortunate situation. Now, I don't like being wrong, except when my worst case assumptions about humanity don't come true. Then I don't mind so much. There was also Heather's clear fondness for her community and the sense of affection I saw between her and her kids when they returned to their home a few days later. This little guy is Bucky, one of Heather's nephews, who is staying next door with Heather's mom and dad. During my stay at Heather's, he would occasionally stop by the room where I had my laptop set up and say hello. On one of our last days together, he saw me monitoring audio on my headphones, so he asked if he could listen to something. I played him a country song because they're playing country music nearby, and I thought, when in Rome, and I like country as well. But he asked for some rock and roll, so I think I played him some Jerry Lee Lewis and then some of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. He liked it, Speaking of Pet Sounds, I played that album quite a bit while working on the 3-roll estate footage and on this video story I'm sharing with you. That also helped me move forward, especially the song You Still Believe in Me. Maybe you've heard it. I'm not a singer, but I'll give you some of the words just for reference. I know perfectly well I'm not where I should be. I've been very aware you've been patient with me. Every time we break up, you bring back your love to me. And after all I've done to you, how can it be you still believe in me? It's a moving song. Now, the conventional interpretation of that song is that Brian Wilson is singing to his girlfriend. But then you have that ethereal sound referenced specifically in the liner notes. They say they were striving to get that ethereal sound and that ascending choir-like humming. It doesn't seem like too much of a stretch to consider that the song might actually be a song to God. Whether the Beach Boys were consciously aware of that possibility or not. After all, in Christian theology, believers are preparing for ultimate union, and together they form the church, described as the bride of Christ. If nothing else, it's an interesting thought experiment to consider that song, that kind of substitution. What if he isn't singing to just his girlfriend? Pet Sounds wasn't the only recurring inspiration for this project. There was also the Harry Potter series. I listened to a couple of the books while working on the 3-roll estate promo, and rewatched The Goblet of Fire on Blu-ray while fleshing out my thoughts for this video. Before going further, I want to address a dismissive attitude some people have towards Harry Potter and adults who still revisit the series. The blunt version is something like this.
Isn't it a little infantile for an adult to keep revisiting children's fluff when there is more adult appropriate fare? Did I read instead like the ever-evolving list of COVID mask protocols? The entire oeuvre of the recently deceased Philip
A few things about that. First, I'm not just reading Harry Potter. Some of the other books I've read recently include Ernest Hemingway on Writing by John Bedford Lloyd, Middlemarch by George Eliot, Rock Me on the Water, 1974, the year Los Angeles transformed movies, music, television, and politics by Ronald Brownstein. Also, if you follow me on Twitter or have listened to enough episodes of my podcast, you'll see that I'm not afraid to take on challenging topics, even when that means taking on the prevailing beliefs in the creative fields where I want to build a career. So I'm not just taking in or discussing children's literature. That said, I regularly revisit the Harry Potter series, not just because it's a well-crafted story, but because each time I go back to it, I'm reminded of the potential power of camaraderie, innocence, wonder, and love. I don't know about you, but I need regular reminders of that because this brave new postmodern world of ours keeps trying to make me forget. And besides, if an intellectual powerhouse like Jordan B. Peterson sees enough merit in the Harry Potter stories to sprinkle substantive discussions about them in his work, then that's good enough for me. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. But I'm mentioning it here because I was actually listening to Harry Potter, specifically Half-Blood Prince, while heading to Houston to try to escape the storm. Oh man. The accident happened not before, not after, but right when Harry goes to the funeral of the spider Aragog, because Felix Felicis, the liquid luck potion he drank, made him sense that going would help him extract the memory he needed from Professor Slughorn. I know it was at that exact spot because I stopped listening when the accident happened, and then later I went back and checked to see where I had left off. That moment in the story, it's like a memento mori, but times 2. You get it twice. So you have the death of the beast, Aragog. It once threatened Harry and company in earlier books. So he's going there against his will because the potion is telling him he should. They're reminded of the death there. But then at that funeral event, as they're drinking, or the adults are drinking, Harry gets a sense that he should talk to Professor Slughorn about the death of his mother, Lily Potter. So you have the reminder of death with Aragog, reminder of death, Harry literally reminding Professor of Lily's death. In storytelling parlance, that would be the belly of the beast. And in the story, at least, there was no other way for him to get to where he needed to be. I took note of it. And it did also influence this video. But it's not the first time a passage from a Harry Potter story was closely tied to a critical moment of my life. So I went for a run. And while I was running, I was listening to the audiobook of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Book 6. I've gone through the books a couple times. This time around, I was going through them again, trying to get a better sense of the structure of the stories. They're remarkably well structured. J.K. Rowling, of course, an incredible writer, incredible imagination, but the stories are also really well structured. And I thought it would be helpful to go through each book, try to figure out what's the dramatic question, how do they develop, and so on. While I was running, I realized the structure. I got a better sense of it. I'd been thinking about it, and so the run reinforced it. You could say Book 6 is essentially structured around this dramatic question. Is someone like Dumbledore foolish for seeing the good in others, even in those who are not easy to like? And in Book 6, the answer to that seems to be, well, yes, so it would seem. That changes in Book 7. And that was significant to me because it related to a question I had about Carlton Cuse and something that I had sent him years ago. It was enough to get me to rethink my position. That kind of thing probably happens more than many of us acknowledge. And not just with Harry Potter. For example, the title for Terrence Malick's 2019 film, A Hidden Life, was derived from those concluding lines from George Eliot's Middlemarch. The quote is, "The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." And you see that quote at the end of the film. Reading the book helped me to see just how much of an influence Middlemarch has on A Hidden Life. Even though the former is set in provincial English town in 1832, and the latter is set in a Nazi-occupied Austrian village during World War II. But at the heart of both stories, we see characters who are struggling to do what is right, even when confronted by opposing social pressures.
I can't do what I believe is wrong.
I decided to read Middlemarch after hearing Heather McDonald recommend it on an episode of the Book Club podcast. It felt like something I should check out, and it eventually colored this conversation. I'm mentioning all that here because this video is, in a sense, about wrestling with the dissonant notes and inspirations at hand that determine whether possibilities unfold in an affirming way. I talked about that a few minutes earlier in regards to the Green Knight. Along those lines, there's that sense of dueling inchoate forces in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and I noticed that when rewatching it recently. Goblet of Fire, the first book or film in the series where fledgling romances surface for our main characters, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, the heroic triad. But it's also where Lord Voldemort's new body is formed. That's interesting because Goblet of Fire has certain similarities with the folklore around the Holy Grail. As a quick refresher, the Holy Grail was said to be the chalice Christ drank from at the Last Supper and used by Joseph of Arimathea to catch Christ's blood during the crucifixion. King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table are tasked with recovering it, and if they can get it, there's a sense that they will somehow restore harmony to the land. So in a sense, the Grail story suggests the potential for a restored relationship with the divine. But only the knights who are pure of heart can attain it. Those who aren't ready are cautioned against going on the quest, because doing so can have all-consuming, even fatal consequences. That's not unlike Dumbledore's cautions about putting one's name in the Goblet of Fire.
Eternal glory. That is what awaits the student who wins the Triwizard Tournament. But to do this, that student must survive 3 tasks. 3 extremely dangerous tasks.
As it happens, the Goblet of Fire is not the only fire-emitting vessel in the story. There's also that erupting cauldron from which Voldemort is reborn.
The Dark Lord shall rise again.
And, you know, a cauldron is kind of like a large chalice. That suggests either a champion or a villain can emerge from a trial by fire. On the one hand, there's fledgling union for the heroic triad with the relationships they have with each other, the romances. Sometimes it's tempered by competitive rivalries.
You're a right foul git, you know that?
I think so.
I know so.
Anything else?
Yeah, stay away from me.
Fine.
On the other hand, there's the malicious narcissism of Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters. Both are in flux until the end of the Goblet of Fire. We're not sure which way it's going to go. In fact, Harry's big decisive moment comes in the Triwizard Maze. He has to decide between getting the Triwizard Cup for himself or saving Cedric from the maze roots that engulf him. Notably, Cedric is a romantic rival for the affections of Cho Chang, which reinforces the story's thematic tension. Oh, that's Cedric. Quite the charmer. Even Harry Potter is envious of him. Even Harry isn't sure what he will do.
For a moment there, I thought you were going to let it get me. For a moment, so did I.
But he eventually chooses cooperation over competition. At least when someone else's survival is on the line, he's not going to let someone else possibly die just so that he can win. Had he made the more selfish choice, then it seems unlikely that he would have found the moral fortitude to take on Lord Voldemort. At the very least, such a callous choice for personal gain at the cost of another's well-being could very well have been Harry's first steps towards becoming a kind of Lord Voldemort. It's interesting, there's almost the opposite story with the latest book in the Hunger Games series, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Susan Collins. Came out in late 2020. And that's like the inverted version of that story, following someone who becomes the corrupt president in that world. He has a choice as well. There's competition, there's a sense of fledgling romance, and it goes a different way. Interesting. But anyway, it wasn't an easy choice for Harry, but in part because of the influence of his friendship with Ron and Hermione and the corrective guidance of Dumbledore, he makes the right decision, setting in motion the events that lead up to the cataclysmic series finale a few books away. Not every choice is like that, but some of them can be. And when everything seems to be in flux, it's worth taking note of the influences that nudge us in one direction or another. As to the timing of that section in the Half-Blood Prince and the accident, again, I don't know how I feel about that. Time will tell if it was merely a coincidence or not. It may very well be. At the very least, though, it led to the Goblet of Fire discussion I just shared with you. And besides, sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. For example, Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana on Sunday afternoon, August 29th, exactly 16 years to the day of Hurricane Katrina. Oh, and Heather, the girl whose place I was staying at, it just so happens we share the same birthday. I didn't realize that until the road trip I told you about. Then there was Luke's text message. If you saw part 1 of this series, you may remember he was the guy who first told me about the new Rev Coffee location by my place, and that eventually led to the video I did with them. After Hurricane Ida struck land, he reached out to see how I was doing. And I told him I'd been in an accident because he asked. But then he asked if I needed a ride back. I was over an hour and a half away from my place. So I told him I had a couple other possibilities I was exploring. In truth, all of the car rental places I had called said they didn't have anything available, and they didn't know when cars would be available. I figured I might have to take a hit and rent a U-Haul for the week or something, but unprompted, he graciously offered to come pick me up. When I realized it was an earnest offer, I accepted. I was moved by how willing he was to go out of his way to help. Drive several hours in his case. It was like Heather and her family going out of their way to host me. Their generosity and the timing of it all. Heather actually told me that she thought she may have driven past me shortly after the accident happened, although she didn't recognize it at the time. Those are things that I just can't rationally explain away. My family was similarly supportive. My brother-in-law had reached out that Saturday night to see how I was doing shortly after the accident. I didn't tell him about the accident until he messaged me, but he reached out when I most needed to talk to a friendly voice. I wouldn't have called on my own. My knee-jerk reaction is not to reach out to family in those moments because I don't want to worry them. But since he asked, I told him, and then he gave me a call. That was another bit of serendipitous timing. So those are some of the positive influences that helped me find the resolve to finish the 3-roll estate promo video based on the footage I shot with Kirby. I wasn't sure that I would finish it, to be honest, but I felt like I needed to keep pressing onward to find something positive, or at least keep my mind preoccupied with something. Most of that video, which I'll show you here in just a moment, was done in After Effects using masks, luma keys, various other effects. I am not going to go into all that here. This video is long enough, but if you're curious, let me know. Shoot me a comment. Maybe I'll do a video about the effects side of the video at some point. But anyway, I was able to make it amidst an uncertain, tumultuous time. And at the very least, I'm grateful that I found the inspiration. I had people come into my life in affirming ways to help me in ways that I still can't explain. And they helped me get past a pretty dark place so that I could be productive enough to put that together. So without further ado, here's what I made with that. So that's what I ended up making. What do you think? Should I keep pressing onward or turn my attention elsewhere? It does seem like the course I've chosen, the one I've been pursuing for so long, has been fraught with so much resistance. That doesn't necessarily mean I should change course, but I might need some encouragement at this point to keep pressing onward. One way to do that is to like the video or share it with those who might appreciate it. But in any case, whatever you're facing, I hope this video gave you a little nudge to keep pressing onward, or at least to look for your own positive influences and inspirations that might help make the journey a little easier. I appreciate you watching. I do have a couple more videos in this series, so if you subscribe, you'll be the first to know about when they come out. Until next time, I wish you well, and if it's not too late for me, then it's definitely not too late for you. So here's hoping we can get to better things together.
It's in the book of stars, the dusky twilight in the eyes, shadows of our lives, dancing in the pool they rise.
I got this letter from my mom, the same day I got that letter from the wrecking company. So, take a look. In addition to the cookies my mom sent, by the way, cookies she individually wrapped so that they wouldn't crumble on the trip, she also sent me a check for $1,500. Even now, I can't quite put that to words. It meant a lot. It wasn't something I asked for. One of these days, I'll pay her back when I'm back on my feet, she said. It's a gift, but I consider it a loan. But in any case, thanks, Mom. After a couple of frustrating searches, I finally found a used car that was a good fit for me. This is my Jeep Patriot. I'm calling it Memento.